What if I told you that in just 6 minutes, a team of Ukrainian soldiers would have to choose between completing their mission or surviving the night? On September 7th, 2025, 4 missiles, each weighing nearly a ton, were launched under enemy fire, aimed at a hidden ammunition depot deep inside Russian-held territory. They weren't just launching steel. They were launching everything they had left. Behind them, the hum of radar, the scream of Smerch rockets, and the deafening silence of a war that had already taken too much. Ahead, the most advanced air defense Russia could offer, 500 million worth of hardware, ready to destroy them in mid-air. What happened next wasn't just a military strike. It was a high-stakes game of courage, coding, and consequences. And in the end, the night sky over Donbas turned into a burning testament to what 4 missiles and a few brave men can do in 6 minutes. This is not just a story about missiles. It's a story about sacrifice, about technology pushed to its limit, and about how sometimes the course of war changes in the blink of an eye. Let me show you how it happened. It was 10:03 p.m. in the town of Prosk. The sky was unusually quiet. No artillery, no drones, just wind moving through tall grass. Inside a camouflaged 8X8 transport vehicle, Major Ivan Chernenko stared at his encrypted phone. The message had just come through. Mission approved. Cartisk Depot, you are green to fire. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The crew around him had already begun moving, like they'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Only tonight it felt different. Ivan had been here before. 4 months earlier, a similar strike had gone horribly wrong. They were too slow to relocate. The counter-battery radar found them, and the last thing he heard was the sound of his gunner, Maxim, screaming coordinates into the radio before everything went black. Maxim didn't make it. That night haunted him. Tonight was a chance to finish what they started. Coordinates? He asked, voice low. Coming in now, replied Dima, the youngest of the crew, just 23, but steady as stone. On another screen, an icon blinked. Typhoon unit, data sync, 87%. Somewhere, deep inside Russian territory, a drone team was risking their lives to give these missiles a fighting chance. Their signal fed directly into the missile's brain. Real-time adjustments, encrypted GPS, everything riding on a few packets of data crossing a battlefield soaked in jamming. I want those birds ready in 90 seconds, Ivan said. Roger that, replied the gunner. The Vilka-M's tubes began to rise. Each missile, nearly 18 feet long, was a beast of steel and silicon, developed in Kyiv, refined in secret, capable of slicing through reinforced bunkers like a hot knife through bone. But it wasn't just the specs that mattered tonight. It was why they were firing. This was Cartisk, a critical supply depot for Russian artillery in Donbas, the place where 3 weeks of shells were stored. Take it out and Ukraine would buy itself precious time, lose this shot, and it might not come again. Outside, the wind shifted. The static on the comms grew louder. Somewhere out there, the Russian radar was already watching. Ivan closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't praying. He was remembering. Then he whispered, "Let's finish what Maxim started." But before the first missile could fly, the world needed to understand what made Vilka-M so deadly, and why Russia feared it more than anything else in Ukraine's arsenal. The Vilka-M wasn't born on a battlefield. It was born in a basement, under flickering fluorescent lights, in the cold winter of 2015, just months after Russia annexed Crimea. Ukraine's military was in tatters. Its Soviet-era arsenal was crumbling. And in the back room of the Kyiv Design Bureau, a small team of engineers made a decision. If no one will give us the weapons we need, then we'll build them ourselves. They didn't have much. Old blueprints, a handful of functional test rigs, and one man with a vision, Serhiy Bondarenko. Serhiy wasn't a general. He wasn't even in uniform. He was a missile designer who'd once worked on Soviet projects and now found himself fighting a war with spreadsheets. But Serhiy had lost something too. His son, Danilo, an artillery officer, was killed by a Russian missile in Luhansk. The irony was cruel. The system that took Danilo's life had components Serhiy helped design. So he returned to work, not to mourn, but to build. And from that pain came Vilka-M. It was unlike anything Ukraine had ever made. An 800-kilogram missile with a 170-kilogram warhead, engineered to punch through 2 meters of reinforced concrete. It didn't just fly, it thought. Guided by a fusion of GPS, GLONASS, and INS, its brain adjusted 50 times per second, correcting course even while dodging jammers, clouds, and chaos. Its secret? A fiber-optic gyroscope developed in-house, capable of maintaining heading accuracy to 0.2 degrees per hour, enough to strike a truck from 80 kilometers away. But building it wasn't enough. They had to test it, in secret, at night, in abandoned quarries and remote steppe valleys. And every test came with risk, because every failed launch wasn't just a setback, it was another reminder of what they were up against. In early 2018, the first Vilka-M veered off course by 700 meters. In 2019, one misfired and exploded on the pad. But by 2022, the missile was ready. And by 2025, it had earned a nickname among Russian soldiers. The Ghost of the Steppe. Because by the time you heard it, it was already too late. But even the smartest missile means nothing if it can't outrun a Russian counter-battery strike. And that's exactly what Ukraine faced next. A 6-minute race against death. At exactly 10:30 p.m., a faint pulse hit the passive sensors aboard the Vilka-M launcher. The crew froze. That pulse was the electronic signature of Russia's Zoopark M1, a counter-battery radar designed to hunt artillery. It had locked on. And now, the countdown had begun. 6 minutes. That is how long they had before Russian Smerch rockets, each carrying 100 kilograms of high explosive, would rain down on their exact position. No time to rethink, no time to relocate. Only one option: launch and pray. Confirm radar contact, Ivan barked. Confirmed 38 kilometers northeast. Zoopark M1 Type 1 sweep pattern, replied the gunner. Estimate time to impact? 5 minutes, 45 seconds, and falling. The team snapped into motion. The target data from Typhoon unit had just finished syncing. The encrypted packets, barely 5 megabytes, held the exact coordinates of Cartisk depot. That meant 4 things. The missiles could now be armed. The autoloader had 90 seconds to prepare the first tube. Each launch had to be spaced by 45 seconds to prevent overheating. They didn't have that kind of time. Ivan's decision was immediate. Cut the cycle. Fire every 30 seconds. We'll burn the launcher if we have to. No one argued, because if they waited, they'd never get to fire at all. Outside, the temperature dropped, but inside the vehicle it rose fast. The engine was already revving 2,200 RPM. The driver had one job. The second the last missile flew, he had to floor it. The vehicle had 90 seconds to vanish before incoming Smerch rockets turned this spot into a crater. At 10:34:02, the first Vilka-M launched. A roar like thunder, a white-hot trail, the kind of noise that echoes through your ribs and settles behind your eyes. The flash could be seen from 50 kilometers away. Russian infrared sensors were now watching. So were radar arrays, and probably satellites. The second missile was already cycling. Tube 2, armed. At 10:34:33, the second launch cracked the night open again. Windows shattered, birds scattered. And somewhere far away, a Russian radar operator marked a fresh heat signature. Target fixed, 50 meters deviation. Transmit to fire units. And then, a whistle. Thin, shrill, like a scream through the clouds. Incoming. Smerch rockets, traveling at 1,200 meters per second, had already been fired. Impact ETA, 4 minutes. The third missile launched at 10:35:09, its backblast nearly peeling paint off the vehicle. The crew could feel the heat on their necks. No one spoke. The fourth missile was almost ready. But now the walls of the launcher showed signs of thermal stress. Hairline fractures, paint flaking. They didn't care. At 10:35:42, the final Vilka-M leapt into the sky. 30 tons lighter, the vehicle lurched forward, accelerating out of its death zone. And not a moment too soon. Because 400 meters north, the first Smerch rocket slammed into the dirt. A thunderous boom that shook the earth, followed by another and another. Their old location, gone. But 4 missiles were now in the sky, slicing toward Cartisk at Mach 3. Their time on Earth was over. Now it was up to the machines. But the missiles hadn't escaped yet, because ahead of them lay the most expensive air defense wall Russia had ever built. And it was waiting. The Vilka-M missiles were in the air, 4 of them, each screaming toward the Cartisk depot at 100 meters per second. But now, they had to survive. Ahead of them stood the most sophisticated and expensive air defense system Russia had ever fielded in Donbas. Tor-M2, a fast-reacting precision kill vehicle with dual radar arrays and Mach 3 interceptors. Pantsir S-1, a hybrid beast packing both missiles and anti-aircraft cannons. Combined price tag, $500 million. And those systems had one job: erase anything that moved like Vilka. At 10:40 p.m., the lead missile crossed 8,000 meters altitude, just above the forward line of Russian air defenses. Its AI began rapid assessments. Signal degradation detected, GPS jamming active, GLONASS jamming active. Switching to inertial navigation. Just 500 milliseconds later, the missile's internal guidance locked in, using fiber optic gyros and accelerometers. No outside signals, just physics, and trust in math. The Vilka wasn't blind, it was just flying with instinct. 28 kilometers ahead, the Tor-M2 picked it up. Contact, bearing 219, altitude 6,000 meters, velocity, Mach 3. The Russian operator focused the 600 kilowatt phased array radar on the missile's radar cross-section. Target locked. Engage. 2 interceptors launched, 9 M338 missiles, each moving at Mach 2.8. But the Vilka wasn't flying straight. At 10:42, just as the interceptors were mid-flight, the lead missile executed a 15-degree left bank, staying on target but shifting outside the predicted intercept cone. The Tor's targeting computer blinked red, misprobable. But the operator didn't care. He launched 2 more. Meanwhile, the Vilka's second missile entered the sector. Now there were 2 threats closing fast. Too fast. Doctrine said, focus on one. Panic said, try both. Across the valley, a Pantsir S-1 began spinning. Its radar scanned the sky, trying to isolate a target. But Vilka was approaching from its blind angle. Low, fast, hidden by terrain clutter. Its missiles weren't ready in time. Back at Tor, the second salvo fared better. 2 missiles detonated within 50 meters of the Vilka. But the warhead held. Internal gyros registered the jolt and corrected. Like a predator with one eye punched in, but still locked on the prey. By 10:45, the third Vilka-M entered the zone. Pantsir now had 3 inbound targets. Too much, too fast. The system split fire, 3 missiles per target. A tactical mistake. Pantsir's 57 E6s needed concentrated salvos to guarantee kills. Now they had a 33% chance of success at best. Meanwhile, the first Vilka was diving. Hard. It had dropped to 1,500 meters, then 800, then 500. And now it was below radar horizon, masked by terrain. Racing at treetop level. No more intercepts. No more tracking. Only 12 seconds left. Somewhere, a Russian gunner stood beside a ZSU-23 Shilka, fingers clenched around twin triggers, scanning a patch of sky with sweat in his eyes. He had 3 seconds to spot it, and only 1 chance to fire. At 10:49:10, the lead Vilka crested the final ridge, its warhead-armed radar altimeter humming. Every system in the Russian quadrant lit up, but it was too late, because just beneath the missile was Cartisk, a depot holding 3 weeks' worth of war, and in 12 seconds, everything would change. At 10:49:12 p.m., the first Vilka-M broke over the ridge, just 8 kilometers from its target. The missile was now flying low, just 380 meters above ground, moving faster than the eye could track. Below it, the Cartisk ammunition depot, A spiderweb of warehouses, stacked with everything from BM-21 Grad rockets to 152mm shells, S-300 warheads, and crates of anti-tank mines. 3 weeks of artillery, enough to sustain Russia's Donbas offensive into October. And in 12 seconds, it would all be over. At the last moment, a ZSU-23 Shilka opened fire. Its 423mm cannons spat out 3,400 rounds per minute, a wall of lead cutting the air. Tracer rounds streaked into the darkness, searching for the ghost racing just meters above the rooftops. But the missile didn't flinch. Its AI adjusted trajectory midstream, ducked a final burst, and aimed straight for the eastern warehouse. At 10:49:23, the radar altimeter pinged a positive lock on solid structure. The warhead armed, and then impact. 170 kilograms of high explosive tore through the reinforced roof, punched through 2 interior walls, and detonated among crates of 120mm rockets stacked on forklifts. What happened next wasn't a blast, it was a chain reaction. The primary explosion triggered a secondary detonation, the kind that ignites everything else. Within 300 milliseconds, the shockwave reached nearby pallets of 152mm shells. The blast cracked open their propellant casings, then it found the fuel tanks, then the Grad rockets. And then, the roof came off. 15 tons of steel lifted like a soda can in a hurricane, twisted mid-air, and came crashing down, engulfed in flame. 30 seconds later, the second Vilka-M missile struck the northern warehouse. It hit dead center, slicing into crates of BM-21 launch payloads. The result, a burst so violent it sent live rockets flying, unguided, ignited, into adjacent depots, starting fires across 60,000 square meters. By 10:50:20, the third Vilka landed in the western sector, detonating inside a storage zone for M22 Uragan warheads. These were cluster munitions, and they cooked off, one by one, spraying submunitions in every direction. The concrete support beams buckled, the ceiling collapsed. The ground trembled as shockwaves moved through buried fuel lines. Then the flames reached the S-300 stockpile, high-grade surface-to-air missiles stored in modified shipping containers, each packed with 133 kilograms of explosives and solid fuel. 1, 2, 3. 13 missiles cooked off. They launched vertically, like accidental fireworks, before arcing back and detonating mid-air. The shockwave shattered windows in Cartisk city center, 3 kilometers away. Residents woke to mushroom clouds and flaming skies. At 10:52, the fourth Vilka-M hit what was left of the depot, a burning inferno of ammunition, twisted metal, and secondary fires. It didn't need to find a building. It simply added heat to hell. At 10:55, an underground bunker, once thought impenetrable, succumbed to fire and pressure. Inside were 300mm Smerch rockets. Their detonation formed a 40-meter crater, lifting dirt and steel into the sky. Above it all, a black column of smoke rose, visible from 60 kilometers away. And just like that, 3,000 tons of Russian ammunition were erased from the battlefield in less than 4 minutes. But beyond the fire and numbers was a ripple effect that Ukraine had long hoped for. A pause in the storm. Because wars are not just won by weapons, but by time. By 11:10 p.m., the sky over Cartisk was no longer black. It was orange, crimson, choking with smoke. 4 warehouses once filled with steel and precision, now burned like oil fields, sending embers and ash into the night. Fire crews from across the sector had already arrived, but none could get closer than 2 kilometers. The heat? Over 1,800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt steel beams, warp concrete, and fuse ammunition casings together like slag. Inside command bunkers, Russian officers watched grainy satellite feeds in disbelief. No one had expected all 4 missiles to hit, let alone survive a layered 500-meter air defense screen. But what stunned them most wasn't the impact, it was the efficiency. 4 missiles, 4 hits, 1 depot. 3 weeks of artillery, gone. Across the border, in Ukraine, the Typhoon drone operators sat in silence. They had watched it all happen in thermal vision. The infrared bloom, the flare of rocket fuel, the final collapse of the depot's eastern wall. They didn't cheer. They simply pulled off their headsets and waited for the encrypted confirmation. Strike confirmed, primary target eliminated. Secondary detonations observed, mission complete. But this wasn't just another strike. Because in Donbas, artillery isn't a weapon. It's the heartbeat of the war. Without it, Russia loses momentum, loses range, loses pressure on every Ukrainian position from Bakhmut to Avdiivka. Cartisk wasn't just a storage site. It was the nerve center of Russia's frontline logistics. And now, it was rubble. For Ukraine, it meant time, the most precious currency in war. Time to regroup, time to resupply, time to breathe. And sometimes, that's all you need to change the tide. But for the soldiers on the ground, the aftermath was less strategic and more surreal. At dawn, satellite photos would show a cratered wasteland. But hours earlier, the crew of the Vilka launcher had parked their vehicle in a dried ravine, shut off the engine, and waited. None of them spoke. The driver lit a cigarette. The gunner sat with his back to the tire, hands still trembling. Even just stared at the stars, still faintly visible beyond the haze. "We got it," someone whispered. He nodded. But what he felt wasn't victory. It was something else. Stillness. The kind that only comes after you've thrown everything you have into the fire. And survived. But the silence wouldn't last. Because while Ukraine had bought itself breathing room, Russia would respond, and not with words. By 11:12 p.m., the fires were still burning, but the missiles were long gone. No wreckage, no trail, just four shadows, vanished into the night, leaving behind a silence so loud it echoed. In war, we often measure power in tons, explosives, steel, troop strength. But this strike, this wasn't about weight, it was about time. 6 minutes to launch, 4 minutes to impact, 2 hours of fire. And now, 3 weeks of Russian artillery, erased in 360 seconds. For the outside world, the news would come hours later. Satellite images, defense ministry statements, and the usual denials. But for the men who launched those missiles, for the drone crews in hiding, for the families in Cartisk awakened by fireballs in the sky, time was all that mattered. Because in modern warfare, time isn't just a resource, it's a weapon. A few extra seconds to aim, a few early minutes of intel, a few hours where the enemy can't fire back. That's the difference between holding the line and being pushed into the dirt. And for Ukraine, this strike gave them something rarer than victory. A pause, a window to breathe, to reload, to regroup. But perhaps most of all, it gave them something to believe in. Because 4 missiles launched under fire, dodging the best technology money can buy, struck their target with chilling precision, not by luck, not by chance, but by sheer will, innovation, and resolve. And that's what the Vilka-M really was. Not just a missile, a message that even under pressure, outgunned and outspent, with minutes to live and everything to lose, you can still hit back. But what happens after the silence? After the headlines fade? What remains when the smoke clears isn't just destruction. It is the weight of what comes next. By midnight, Cartisk was quiet again. But it wasn't peace, it was exhaustion. The kind that settles over rubble, that clings to the smoke rising from a crater, that lives in the eyes of a soldier who's seen too much, too fast. On paper, the mission was a success. 4 missiles, 4 hits. Thousands of tons of Russian ammunition destroyed. A supply chain severed. Momentum halted, but on the ground. The price of that precision was still unfolding. Firefighters searched for survivors among the twisted remains of shipping containers. Medics dug through bunkers caved in by shockwaves. Civilians in Cartisk filmed orange skies from their balconies, unaware they'd just witnessed one of the most effective single strikes of the war. And somewhere, inside a scorched barracks near the depot, a young conscript sat alone, head in hands, covered in ash, whispering names no one else could hear. For Ukraine, this was a message. We can strike, we can reach, and we will decide when. But messages have consequences, because now Russia would retaliate, not just in kind, but in ways designed to punish. More drones, more missiles, more chaos. And the crews who fired the Vilka-M, they would move again, under new names in new forests, carrying silence like a second skin. Back in Kiev, Serhiy Bondarenko, the missile engineer, watched the footage quietly. He didn't speak. He just placed a worn photograph on the table, his son, Danilo, in uniform, smiling before everything changed. Serhiy had built the missile that destroyed Cartisk, but he also built the one that missed years before, that cost him his son. "We hit the target," someone told him over the phone. He nodded, but inside he wondered, how many more targets will we have to hit before this war finally ends? Because precision is a double-edged sword. It brings efficiency, but it never brings closure. Not when every successful strike is followed by the quiet question that no satellite can answer. Was it worth it? If you found this story powerful, share it with someone who believes war is just numbers. Because behind every missile, every crater, every victory, there's a name, a memory, a cost.